Today, on this 11th episode of the Real Recovery Podcast, we're thrilled to host John C., a New Yorker with a compelling tale of survival and transformation. Join us as he shares his journey from a chaotic childhood in Queens, navigating through the throes of addiction, to embracing a vibrant life in recovery. Discover how he overcame the challenges of his early life marked by family dysfunction and substance misuse, and found renewal and hope.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Recovery Podcast. I'm Julie, your co-host, on this journey of healing and transformation. Together with my co-host, Peter, we dive into the heart of recovery, sharing stories that resonate with courage and inspiration.
That's right, Julie. Each episode is a new chapter in this vast narrative of recovery, and we're honored to bring them to you. But keep in mind the perspectives you'll hear are for informational purposes only and may not reflect the views of the podcast or our partners.
Indeed, while these conversations can be a powerful part of your recovery toolkit, they are not substitute for professional medical advice. We encourage you to seek guidance from your healthcare provider for any treatment-related decisions.
And if you're facing an immediate crisis, or if you just need to talk to someone who understands, don't hesitate to call the Recovery Crisis Line at 503-223-8569. That number is also on our website. Help is available 24/7.
Now let's begin our episode
Of recovery, real recovery. Yeah.
We've been busy.
Yeah, very busy. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you made it all this way. Southeast Portland to the hood. No, it's not.
No, it wasn't bad at all.
Yeah.
Peter, Don, and I live really close to each other now, so it's really convenient. It is. It's so good.
Yeah, we do. So we are here with John, just chit-chatting. And obviously, because you're in recovery, so that's why you're on the Real Recovery Podcast. And I'm Peter. I didn't introduce myself.
Thank you.
Most people would know because I have a little intro that plays before we get into our conversations.
I'm Julie, the sexy one.
Hi, Julie.
The sexy voice.
No, just the sexy one, period. Without makeup and,
Yeah, so we just wanted the point of this, just telling you, I think our listeners, if they've listened to a few of these, they get the point that they're a fly on the wall. But it's the idea is to share the experience that you had before recovery and then into recovery and now, but how your life has changed. We talk about the promises, but that's usually what people get to towards the end. Yeah, so we just wanted to get a little bit to know about you, where you came from, what kind of upbringing you had, because I found that a lot of the stories that we have on our show, it starts there. It's usually, and that would be my dog up and down. So if you hear a little click clack, yeah, she's a little active.
It's a family affair. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I love dogs. Yeah. Thank you both for having me. It's some of you out in the audience may not realize, but I'm actually on a leather couch. So it actually does feel like a Freudian experience of therapy, but I'm not laying down. I'm sitting up. So with that being said, I'll tell you a little bit about my past and where I came from and my journey into recovery and where I am and how I am today. I'm a native New Yorker, born and bred in Queens, New York, and came from a family, a beautiful dysfunctional family of Italian, Irish, Roman Catholic, as we would say, or Catholic, as most people would say. And I came from a very blue-collar family. My father was in World War II, both my brothers who were much older than I. So I was growing up as a lonely child, and that is because everybody was 15 to 17 years older than I. Both my parents came from Harlem. I was, the Rolling Stones, the quiet one. I was the quiet one out of the whole family. And as a kid, they thought it was a cute idea to have John Joseph, JJ, as my name was as a child, to drink Rheingold beer out of shot glasses at 7 years of age. And I came from a family of partiers. It would be a weekday night. I went to Catholic school at that time, and I just remember family coming over, cousins and uncles and aunts coming over with a case of Rheingold, and it'd be probably 11 o'clock, midnight at night, and my mom would be cooking potatoes and eggs for the family. And that was the excitement. So we were partiers. They were partiers. I guess at 7 years old, I could have been a partier as well. And it always ended up with fisticuffs and fights and knives being thrown around the house. And so little JJ was crawling underneath the dining room table. And it's really funny in retrospect, looking back at my past as a child, I was pretty fearful, right? I remember going to Catholic school in from first grade to fourth, and them talking about God. And I would be like, if you saw my family at home, I don't know if there is a God. It was crazy, right? Mayhem. And today as an adult, it's what's made me today, really. Both my parents drank a lot. I don't know if they were alcoholics. I can't say that. I could tell you when they got older, they slowed down and stopped, which was not the case for me as I got older. I came into recovery when I was 37. I drank heartier, more so than any of my family members. But as a child, I was definitely fearful, right? And being in Catholic school, I just couldn't get it. It didn't make sense to me. Since my family were part, I was at 7, 8 years of age making scrambled eggs with a chair against the stove. So I learned how to cook at a very young age. My mom was a big Italian cook. And so I would watch her cook and make the sauce for Sundays and so forth. And it was a crazy family. Growing up, it was my mother, my father, and my godfather. And we would watch TV, and it would be some kind of TV show, Gunsmoke or Mannix or something. And as a child, I would say something similar my mother would say, boy, that guy is cute. And then my family, my godfather, my father would say, no, men say they're handsome. So it wasn't deterred for me to acknowledge another man's beauty, but it was modified to be more of a masculine sense. So that was interesting. And looking back, I was quite fortunate to grow up in the family I was in. By age 11, both my brothers thought it was, again, cute to give John, because I was no longer JJ at 11, tequila sunrises. So when they had parties, I would have 4 tequila sunrises and hold my own. And so that was, and I came from a very, very free family. Both my parents lived in the projects at one time or another. I like to say I'm a proud member of a white trash family and a little bit of a, Queens Archie Bunker style in a way, but definitely loving. As a child, I was pretty much a little adult, right? I had a Mickey Mouse watch, even though I had no place to go. So I was very responsible. And by the time I was 15 is when I sought out drinking and drugging. And in high school, I had a buddy where, now mind you, my parents would allow me to hang out at 15 years of age until 4, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning on weekends. If it was the summer, I could hang out all the time and party and have fun. I was a little adult still. And if I had a hangover, it was funny for the family. And I remember friends and family, my friends' parents would be like, oh, shouldn't you call your mom to tell you're staying over? I'm like, no, she's good. They're like, no, you have to call her. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then on the phone, I would be like, hey, mom, I'm staying. Yeah, I know. They wanted me to call and tell you, but yeah, I'm staying out. Okay, that's good. Thank you. So I was very free.
It sounds like, for me, it sounds like a dream.
Oh, it was a great team. It was a great team. Oh, absolutely. And in the high school buddy I had at the time, his mom did pot. His dad did cocaine. And so when they fell asleep and passed out, he and I would sneak in their room. And he would get the cocaine and I would get the pot. And so 15, 16 of age. Yeah, it was great. And
free.
Yeah, and free. Can you imagine? And fentanyl free too, by the way. So with that being said, it was fantastic. And then by the time I was 17, I remember one time it was a New Year's Eve party that my brother was having at the time. And he was 15 years older than I. I was about 17. And I remember I was working at Spencer Gifts, which I did at school when I was in high school. And I remember going to his party. And again, it's interesting. His wife and friends were actually doing, his wife and her friends were doing pot in one room. And then he and his friends were doing cocaine in another room. And so here I was going back and forth in each room, doing each of those. And being 17, of course, when you're 15 stealing drugs, you're not doing as much coke as you normally would when you have men in their 30s doing lots of coke. And so I remember I did probably the most amount of coke I ever did at 17 and not sleeping, laying on their couch thinking I was going to die, but I didn't. And then drove to work because I had to work the next day. And that was my normal life, right? As a young person, it's what I did. For me,
I have a question during that time. Were you also in like maintaining school and all of that, or was it just hanging out and partying all the time?
A little bit of everything. It's really amazing that I think of myself now being 57 and doing absolutely nothing and hanging out on the couch with the cat. I think I'm just really resting up for my entire life. I've stayed up long hours and everything else, and they always said it would catch up to you. I guess it caught up to me, right?
Yeah.
But it was just one of those things where it was just normal, right? To party. And I did. School, I was not great in high school. I was not. I say that while also getting a 92 on the Regents exam for biology, right? New York State has a Regents program, and I was able to get a 92. So obviously when I put my mind to it. But I was absent a lot in school. I was partying. I smoked weed a lot. It's really strange. I think about it now. From, I don't know, 16, 17, I always had weed on me. It wasn't like I ever had not had it. Friends knew I always had it. And in high school, I was that kid where, since the social family that I came from, I was I was part of every group, right? I was not dedicated to one. I hung out with the jocks. I hung out with the druggies, as we call them, the preppies.
That was me. I
Really?
got along with everyone. And weed was my first drug, too.
Was it?
Like, yeah, I didn't know what cocaine was.
Yeah.
But weed, and I didn't care who I smoked it with.
Right.
It could be the stoners, the jocks, the preppies. I got along with everyone.
Yeah.
I just wanted you to like me.
Which also expands your use. It's not just isolated to one group or not. And so I was always that person. And it's really strange talking about the freedom that I had from my family as opposed to the freedom of what I have today. I was allowed to look at Playboy magazine and porno as a kid. It was fine in my family. And it's really funny today, and most people on the audience don't realize, but I joke around about sex a lot. And if both my brothers have since passed, but when we got the family together, it was a comedy bit between the three of us on any and all sexual innuendos, right? And the reason I say that is because it leads into my life. But through high school, in college, and it's not only until recently I realized I was bisexual for the most part, right? I never really identified with the gay community just as I was, right? I would go into Manhattan because I was only 30 minutes away or so from Long Island at the time when I lived there. And I just didn't identify because I was very different, right? The joke I always say is that the reason I am as I am is because I really had 4 or 5 father figures. My mother she was a brute. I remember when I was a kid, she took down a man by his throat, leaping off the stoop, taking him down to the sidewalk. So she was a trucker. She wasn't an actual trucker. What kind of woman she is when she goes to the Catholic school and curses out a priest. But anyway, so with that being said,
I love your mother.
Oh, she was, again, I was 15 years of age. I would have 16. We would have a party in my basement for Halloween or whatever event. My brothers and my parents would buy me cases of beer for everybody. I hope the statute of limitations is over. And so we would all drink, right? And so I was in the basement. We had a house in Long Island. In the middle floor, we rented out. My mother was on the top. The bathroom was up on the top. I would have a party. It'd be 20, 30 kids or whatever coming from high school. Half the kids would be gone. And I go, where is everybody? Oh, they're talking to your mom. They're upstairs hanging out in the kitchen. And I'm like, what? And I go up there. I'm like, Ma, what are you doing? Come on. And she's, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. And she had palates in her voice, so she could talk raspy. But anyway, so it was a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. And my first year of college, and the reason I say this is because it's pretty miraculous, but my first year of college, I went to a criminal justice school in Manhattan, John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be a cop, police science, or a forensic psychologist. So I took courses on both sides. And I didn't smoke weed for a year and a half because I thought since I was going to go into the legal system, I might as well do that. And I drank, right? I drank a lot. If you ever want to have the best St. Patty's Day parade experience, go to a college for cops. Have ID as a college ID for John Jay. And if you want to get carte blanche, go up to a cop at a parade back then, 30 some odd years ago, you're allowed to go anywhere you want. And so I actually, for the first year and a half, I lived that way, where I did things that probably wasn't appropriate, but I thought I was part of the blue, as they say.
Right.
Because I thought I arrived, right?
Yeah.
And me and my friend Julio would drive around Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, And I wouldn't think, again, the statute of limitations, I wouldn't think stopping at a red light would be an issue because I treated it like a stoplight. Quite ballsy. But that was me when I was younger. I was quite ballsy, right? And coming from the family I came from, how could you not
How
be?
could you not?
Right. And
I wonder if that's an East Coast thing, because you call it ballsy. I call it my ghetto girl side.
yeah.
But I'm the mom that will cuss you out as well
Oh, yeah.
in a heartbeat. And my family, Irish Catholic,
Yeah.
East Coast, every holiday was a holiday. And then, just like you said, I can't remember one with my mother and my grandfather not getting in a fight.
Yeah.
And drinking was the most common thing ever. But I have to tell you the funniest thing about your story.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking about going into legal
Yeah.
and not smoking weed.
Yeah.
When I got into legal,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't smoke weed. Legal trouble, but I never thought about not smoking it because of this or that, though. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting because when I was a kid, I was a child, we'd watch Ironside. It was a movie about a lawyer. And both my parents wanted me to become a lawyer. And it wasn't until I got older and realized that most of the family has been arrested at one time or another that they just wanted somebody to get them out of jail. Right. And so it was funny. So I never became a lawyer, obviously. But through college, my first year of college, I didn't have great grades or SATs because apparently I was drinking and drugging a lot. And then when I went away to school, and I would say the year before I really buckled down and I wasn't smoking weed at John Jay, I got into the dean's list and I transferred to a state college upstate New York in New Paltz, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from Manhattan. And there I went back to weed smoking because why not? I was going for psychology as a major because I already had that buckled down at John Jay. And I started up coke again because why not? And I drank a lot. And I was the type of person in school where, I was involved in a lot of things. I was in college radio and television. I was a fencer. A fencer.
I love that.
Errol Flynn, when I was a kid, it's really strange to think of my family. Errol Flynn, the alcoholic bisexual actor, my family loved him. And so it's really weird to look back on, but my family was very freeing on a lot of things. And my mother would say, she had two things she would say. Can I curse on this thing, by the way? My mother would say two things. She would say, each his own and fuck them. That was her. That anything I would say, Mom, I had a relationship. She broke up with me. She'd go, fuck them, move on. And that was the thing. That was unfortunately, I probably, good or bad or indifferent, have used that over my life. But with that, college, it was great. Anytime anybody wanted to go out during the night, people would ask me because I knew what night was the best night for college, and we had a lot of bars on campus. I mentioned this once recently to somebody. When I gave blood when I was in college, right, during blood drive, they would say, what day do you want? And I would say, I want a Friday. And they said, okay. And they said, what time? I said, around 3:00. And the reason being is because I was planning on going to happy hour at 4:00. And so I thought it was a great idea to have less blood in my system to actually add some alcohol to that, right?
Oh,
And get drunker, right? Like,
heard of that.
that's pretty, I was ingenious, right? But if we look at that, by that time, my father died. Since both my mom and dad, my mom was like 42 when she had me. I was a miracle of life baby, as they say. I was cesarean because we almost both died, but my father was around 52. So he passed away by the time I was 18. And we had to deal with that. And then I questioned about going away to college at the time. And my mom, even though as selfish as a woman she could be, as my brothers would say, she was like, no, go. This is for you. Go. And I was also the first one in my family to go to college. Oh, right. Nice. I think my father may have been the only one who graduated from high school. And I was the first one that graduated for college. And I went to college and I was drinking and drugging. And then at one point, my godfather, who I was very close with, passed away by the time I was like 19, 20 years of age. And it really got to me realizing that people were dying in my family. And even when my father and my godfather passed, I was not religious at all, not believing in God for many of reasons. Going back, I went to Catholic school from first grade to fourth grade. And when we moved out to Long Island, my parents said, do you want to go to Catholic school or public school? And that's what kind of family we were. Like I had a choice, right? I wasn't told I had to do something. And I said, no, I want to go to public school. They said, really? I said, yeah. And they said, oh, you want to go to catechism afterwards? I'm like, no. They're like, well, your friends are going to be in catechism. What are you going to do? I'm like, I'll do something else. I don't have to go. I don't do that. So I was never confirmed. So I'm not a real Catholic. And so I only had communion. With my godfather passing, I didn't have the coping mechanisms, right, to deal with any and all of that. And by the time I was 22, and all throughout this, by the way, I've still been bisexual. I had a boyfriend in college for about 3.5 years, but we still dated women. And some people would say, were you dating women to like kind of throw off the scent of being gay? And I said, no, it's because we just probably both. Yeah. And by the time I was 22, my mother died. And so I had 3 deaths within that time period, which was really rough. And again, I was drinking and drugging, and as any college student would do. And I remember when my mother passed away, there were pills she had. And this is back in the day before the internet. So I, as smart as I am, went to the college library to find out the physician's index for pills or medication and figure out which of her pills were painkillers so I could actually take them and discard the ones that were for other medical purposes. And so here I was, again, happy hour. I would take my pills, didn't tell any of my friends because I didn't have many. And I would take the pills, and I don't even know what they were today, but they were painkillers. And I would drink. Not once did I think I had a problem because
you were just partying.
I was just partying. I was just capitalizing on these poor pills. What's going to happen to them? Are they going to be thrown away? What a waste! My mother would say, "What a sin! What a sin! You're throwing it away. What a waste!" So I was doing good. The thing is, with all 3 of my family members that passed, I was very participatory in. Nobody went easily. What I mean by that, they were either in the hospital for 6 to 9 months. And when my mother passed, I was very involved. While going to college, I would, on weekends, visit her in the hospital and so forth. And so that was tough. But it puts I'm going to tell a story which is morbid, but it puts the story in perspective about my family and about my sense of humor, or my family's sense of humor. But my mother had complications with diabetes and so forth. And so she had to have her right arm amputated. And so I came in right after the surgery, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Fine." And she lifted up her left hand and she said, "Just call me Lefty." And I was like, oh my God. And I remember her saying, "Can you clip my nails?" And so I was clipping her nails, and she looked at me and she said, "Isn't it wild that I took care of you when you were a child and now you're taking care of me?"
Yeah.
So it's such a beautiful thing. Granted, I was actively drinking and drugging, but that's where I was at that point. But if we use that as a reference, I never really dealt with death effectively or soberly. And so, all through that time, and then if we fast forward, there was a time period, and I was talking to a good college buddy about this. He and I got a great job. I got a career that I was at for a very long time, but it was in my mid-20s, making great money and all this other stuff, which was good and bad. And there were times in my mid to late mid-20s where I was having 2 beers with dinner, right? It was just something. But I could tell you, with those deaths in my family, my friends would say, "John's very jaded," right? Of course. How can I not be, right? With family passing as they did. And I still had my 2 older brothers. And what happened was, as time went on, me and my college buddy, who I'm still friends with today, I was an adrenaline junkie. If there was a drug I never tried, I would try to get into. I would want it, right? I remember a friend upstate New York said, "Oh, a buddy's coming up with peyote. You want to do something?" I said, "Yeah." And I waited for hours. The person never showed up. But I remember I waited for hours, right? Because I wanted to try peyote. But with that being said, I got deeper into other things, right? Weed and cocaine and alcohol was steady for me. It wasn't until the later 96 or so. And by the way, keep in mind, I was closeted up until this time. And by the time I was 26, I was probably 29 at the time. I got into ecstasy. Expanded my alphabetical expanded my vocabulary. Yeah, I did Special K, I did ecstasy, I did
and it
acid.
expands your sexual.
Oh, geez.
pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. And even at that time, I was on both sides of the fence for a little bit still. But yeah, and it really, and don't get me wrong, there was a good time of it at one point, right? It was. I became what I like to call a club guy. I wasn't a club kid. I was a club guy at 29, 30, going to all the New York City nightclubs, Limelight, the Tunnel, the Palladium. And talk about ego stuff. There were things that I was just privy to at times. And I was going so often, I got VIP treatment whenever I went into a club. Any door guy that I knew for years passed me right on. There'd be a block long line. And he would see me, wave at me, and I'd come all the way up. And I felt, as they say, I arrived.
Yeah.
And
Celebrity
so,
status.
I had the same feeling when in Seattle. I'd walk into the bar. It was just one particular bar that I was known at others, but that was my home. And I'd walk in there, and it was like Cheers, where they all say, Norm, say, Peter, and parties are on.
And it was the same at the city. Like literally, when I was in my story and talked about doing ecstasy at the city, I was like so popular, like you're saying, that the ecstasy guy would give me like 30 of them because I knew everybody and he didn't. And so he'd give me 1 or 2 free for getting rid of them for him, not realizing he's making all this money. And I'm just happy that my friends are all getting the ecstasy too. Right. Yeah. And we're going to dance even longer.
Oh, yeah. It's an amazing feeling, right? When you walk into a nightclub or a bar and the house drug dealer peeps up his head and is very excited to see you. And I did well back then.
Exactly.
And so I was probably their best customer, or so I like to think. But and with all the ecstasy and all this other stuff, I decided I came out at 30 to both my brothers based on my sexuality. And at that time, I consider myself gay, but I was still interested in women. I messed around with women up until I was about 35. And today I identify as gay.
Darn it. I missed it. I'm so sad I missed my chance. But okay.
Going back, my old home group back in New York City, I remember there's this woman. She's originally from Africa, so she has an accent. And I remember one time I was coming out of the bathroom, and it was a very small spot. And she took her booty and she pushed it against me as I was trying to get through. And she said, "Does African booty will bring you back straight?" And I turned to her and I said, "I'm gay, not dead." And she went, "Woo!" And so she moves forward. So there is fun in sobriety. We're not a glum lot, but
that's my favorite phrase. We're not a glum lot.
Yeah.
I latched onto that early on because I thought my fun was over when I got into the program. I said, oh boy, that's it. I'm admitting it. So now I can't drink anymore because everybody knows that I'm an alcoholic. And so it was devastating in a way because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to go to family events because everybody grab your glass of wine, cheers. And I'm here with my grape juice. Oh, okay, cheers.
And you know what's really funny? Nobody comes to a 12-step recovery program skipping and hopping. But then there's that second thought of, how am I going to have fun? The reason I came to these rooms, right, the recovery, is because I wasn't having fun. But you still latch on to those fun moments, especially at weddings and all this other stuff. In my family, we had fights at weddings and funerals, right? But you would still think, right? Yeah. And so I had a grand old time, right? And then, of course, crystal meth came into the picture. Again, people would say I sought out the drug. And like anything else, things seemed to be manageable, right? Even though I was doing a sea of cocaine and ecstasy. I remember I would do ecstasy probably 3 or 4 days a week. And people would say, you're not supposed to do that. I'm like, what are you talking about? Come on.
And you managed to balance that with keeping a job and...
You know, and this is, you have to understand, this is like the mid 90s or so. And at that time, I was probably within my job for 7 years. And I was a salesperson. And back then, sales was, if you were making money for the company, they left you alone. And I was making the company lots of money. And I was pretty damn good at what I did. And I just got promoted and promoted, even while I was doing any and all of this, right? And I sometimes joke and say I was probably a better salesperson when I was high and drunk than I am actually sober. But that's not really true. It was one of those things where I was able to still do very well, right? And keep my company at bay because I did well and grow the business. And so they were always happy, right? And I was the Manhattan sales rep, all the boroughs, including the Bronx when it was a bad neighborhood. I did things that most people have never done in that territory. And so they were always grateful. They also felt they probably couldn't replace me either based on the territory as rough as it was, right? And they hired a native New Yorker to deal with things, right? It's not often that you're with your two bosses and your company car is being towed away and your boss says, "Oh, we're going to have to find out where to get it." And I said, "No, I know where." So isn't that your first time? I said, "No, this is multiple times. It happens. This is New York. This happens. Your car gets broken into several times. Your car gets towed. It's just what happens." But yeah, and I flourished at work, and it's like anything else. I started doing crystal meth, and things were fine. Right, I was able to do it in small doses, manageably, and then as time went on, I did more. Right. And my weekends became longer. My sick days became more increased. Right. And what happened towards the tail end, and again, yes, it was fun for a time. Right. But going to the club scene and doing all of that. And here's the thing. I was going to the club scene. I was working. I was in relationships or dating. I was working out, going to the gym. My days were full. Right. My weekends were full. And it was working out for a while. Right. And then after a while, it came to the point where doing 5 days of meth and not drinking any foods and dehydrated, you may have to be hospitalized because your electrolytes are off.
Yeah.
And so that's when things were going south. But at that point, for whatever reason, I came into the program when I was about 37. And the 3 years prior to that, I drank like a fiend every day without a hitch. I was drinking at least a 6-pack. And I would say to friends that I had, my immediate friends, some other college friends, I said, "I'm drinking a 6-pack a day. Is that too much?" "Oh, it's fine. It's good." I said, "Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah." And the thing is, we hear this in the rooms. I would drive home from the city. I would actually maybe buy a 6-pack at one deli. And then I get home. I drink that 6-pack, and then I go to the deli that's in walking distance around the corner, right? The kids who were there knew that I drank Sam Adams or the Guinness. I was a beer whore connoisseur. I drank a malt, a dark beer in the winter. In the summer, I drank a Hoegaarden, which is a lighter beer, sometimes a cider. And the thing is, when I was in New York City and I drank, I could actually work with people like my bosses or whoever else. And we drive in every neighborhood in the city. And I could probably tell you I drank and drugged. They knew I drank. But I could tell you I drank in most of the bars in New York City, right? The famous ones, the less famous ones, the hole in a wall, the dives, whatever it was. I drank in all of them, right? And I just had a grand old time. But what happened is, as I was drinking every day, I would, and what was really key for me is that my brother would have Christmas at his house, right? Only in my family, the Jews would have Christmas at their house. And with that happening is that bring over 2 6-packs for Thanksgiving. Right? 2 6-pack. I already drank a 6-pack before I got there. So I would possibly drink a 6-pack when I got there. And I don't know what kind of beer I brought. And then I'd come back for Christmas, right? A month and a half or whatever, a month later. And I would bring another 2 6-packs. And he'd say, "Oh, put it in the refrigerator down in the basement." And I go to the basement. And the 6-pack that I left there the last time for Thanksgiving was still in the refrigerator. And I go back up and I go, "Oh, you finished the beer and replaced the beer I got?" He goes, "No, that's from when you last left it." I'm like, oh my God, he didn't drink it? And so that's when I started realizing I drank differently than my family, because I was drinking a 6-pack at home, a 6-pack there. Then I probably had another 6-pack when I was home, right? Quite a few beers.
Yeah, pre-function, post-function. I did that. I had to, when we had neighbors we would go out to dinner with and stuff. And that's towards the end, that's what I have to do. Yeah. And then I would drink like a couple beers or whatever it was, wine. And they'd be like, "Wow, Peter sure is a lightweight. He's really getting drunk fast." And they didn't know I had a couple of shots of vodka or whatever it was back at the place. Yeah.
Yeah. And you probably experienced this too. I was either seeking out the drink or the drug, drinking the drunk or the drug, then recovering, right?
Yeah.
It was that cycle. And I
If you
did that
just
for
stay
years.
high, you don't have to recover.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm dead serious. When I first started doing meth, like you, it was a weekend thing, which then became a 4-day thing. But I remember when I started doing it intravenously, the first time I stopped and really slept, it was when I got up, it was like I was 90 because I had been going. And I told myself I would never feel like that again. As soon as I got up, for you, it might be like a shot to get over the shakes. I got high immediately so that my body didn't hurt. And when you'd come off of it, it was painful. It really was. I'd have to smoke and ate the weed. And I remember I always ate Go Krispies.
Oh, wow.
I was so thirsty, like you're saying. And I would drink the chocolate milk after, and it was something smooth to go. I had to plan my meal out. I couldn't just eat food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just brought this up, but the lethargy of being on a binge of meth or even cocaine is unlike no other. Even though there have been times when I've had the flu and I said, I feel like it's not. Your body is like this absence of energy and you can't explain it, right? You're obviously dehydrated, but it's just you're in an outer body experience. You're just not feeling right, but it's just the energy. It's just a totally thrown off. I haven't thought about that since you said that. And I
went through a bad breakup and I swear I stayed high for 6 months. That's how I dealt with it. I literally didn't have time. I made almost $100,000 probably in the escort service in 6 months. Money was my consolation. And because I wasn't sleeping with that person, like actually going to bed and sleeping, I didn't sleep. I would sleep, but not sleep. Right. And I literally stayed high for 6 months.
What I also found is that I couldn't stay high long enough to avoid my life problems because eventually you'd have to come down, right? Eventually.
Or get caught.
Yeah.
One of the two.
And I'm knocking on wood, by the way. I never had a DUI, never got arrested, never had possession, even though I could easily have had that. And so I've been quite fortunate. And it is what it is. And it wasn't until I came in the program and I realized I was being taken care of somehow. It was just really wild. And
I still question, maybe that's why this podcast came out of it, and maybe that's the reason. I always wonder, why was I spared all those times? I had that in my head.
Just the opposite. I was wondering, I'd never drank and drive, not once in my whole life. Why did I get in trouble? And it literally wasn't until I went to IOP, which is intensive outpatient. But it wasn't until I went to IOP when they said, what is the worst situation you've been in and how did that work for you? If you really think about it. And I was like, I needed that time out. And it's the same when I went to IOP. I was working so much that literally the breakdown, the eardrum bursting, like everything, I feel God was sitting me down in both times because I needed the time out.
Yeah.
And like you, my dad died really young. My mom's been dead for years. And being an only is lonely. You don't. And it's crazy. And I do believe the breakup, right, which really got me into drugs even more. I believe the breakup literally was probably the best thing for me, though it hurt and it stung. Because if I hadn't gone through the breakup, how much longer would I stayed on the drugs? That person stayed on drugs for years and years after me. But it literally, I'm a slow learner. Okay. That's why it's progress, not perfection. Else I would have been kicked out. But it took sitting down and having to learn this stuff to get there and realize that usually if you can take your worst situation, you can grow from it if you reverse it. And what did it do for you? Right. And I'm lucky. Every worst situation has done a lot for me.
Yeah. I'm not religious. I'm more spiritual, but it's a blessing in disguise. And it's one of those things where we get to see that as we get the clarity and the
yeah, not when you go through it, though.
Yeah, absolutely not. No, it's definitely right. And here's the thing. I don't have regrets. I don't have regrets that I had to make scrambled eggs and bacon when I was a kid. I don't have regrets that people died when they died. And that is because things happen as they were. And so if we flash forward to, I had an ex at the time, and whenever we would we would console each other at that time. And he said it was a Monday, and so it was the Monday blues from doing drugs and alcohol. And I remember I called him up and I said, hey, you want to hang out? And he said, no. I said, I'm going to a meeting with my other ex who's in recovery. I said, okay. I said, well, what is that? He said, oh, I think I want to stop doing meth and drugs. I said, oh, okay. Hey, why don't I come? Okay, yeah, sure. Here's these two tweakers going to a NA meeting in the East Village where most of the people were heroin addicts. I like to joke, which is probably not appropriate, and say they were nodding off and we were tweaking out. But anyway.
It is appropriate.
Well, it depends who you are, right?
And NA, just for those who are not familiar, is Narcotic Anonymous.
Yeah.
So similar to AA.
Was meth new then?
So it's really weird. Meth was really big on the West Coast, right? For the most part. And then on the East Coast, it was big again among the gay community. Probably, I would say in the early 90s or so, it was probably big. And that's really where the prevalence was in the gay community on the East Coast. As compared to, say, the West Coast is just more expansive, right? Yeah. And it's interesting, but...
You actually are really right, because 1986, it went from ecstasy.
Yeah.
Some people do cocaine to meth.
Yeah.
And it was predominantly a white drug, because it was. And literally at that time, I did sell meth in the city nightclub, and all gay men.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have some gay men come from the bars.
Mm-hmm.
They just wanted to drink more, so they'd come and get some meth to stay out and drink. But I would literally sell these $20 quarters, and I could not make enough of them for the night. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I only sold to the gay guys that I knew.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Insane. But it was huge in the gay community.
Yeah, besides gentrifying neighborhoods, we're also pioneers in the drug scene as well.
I agree. Because I've never done crack,
It's funny. I did crack once, maybe twice, and it just didn't do it for me because you had to keep on doing it. It was like a high maintenance drug,
That's
right?
how I felt about cocaine.
Yeah, meth is so much easier. It's one of those things. And the weird thing about any and all of this is that I could tell you my sobriety date is 12/12/05. And I could tell you that I had a love affair with drinking. I had a love affair with drugs. And if you ask me today, yeah, they were great. And it's not, I just realized for myself today, I can't pick up a drink or can't pick up a drug for me today. I love them.
And there's no off switch.
Right.
In my case, if there's no off switch.
Right.
If there's a glass there better be a whole bunch of bottles back there because I'm going to need all of it.
I'm scared. I am just scared.
A healthy scare.
Yeah. I don't know nothing about fentanyl, and I don't want to.
Right.
I'm sure I could be addicted to it. The first time, I've never done heroin. I'm sure I'm a heroin addict. You know what I'm saying? And it is a healthy scare. It's a scare I don't want my life to be that unmanageable ever again, enough to lose my freedom. Mm-hmm. You guys talk about this and that, literally losing my freedom. Like, I too, Catholic school girl, college graduate. How am I in prison? Like, how did I get to the point? Happen? And how did my best thinking high think that making money in the escort service and not paying taxes was the best way to make an income? Really? That's how distorted it gets. Just like when you were telling, I love that story about you hiding alcohol in the wood stove.
Oh, yeah.
And they were asking him where it was, and he didn't say anything, but he's got ashes all over his face.
That's how I was so smart. And I'm like, wood stove, perfect. No one's ever going to know I hid it in the wood stove. And they're like, Peter, where is it? We know you've got a bottle. Where is it? And Justin's mom, I think it was, it says, he's got ash all over his face.
Oh my
God. What's over there was.
It sounds like the dumbest thing ever, but I love that story.
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
Gotta love it.
That's the place I was at.
How'd you get to recovery?
Perfect segue. Yeah, absolutely. So I went to that one NA meeting and I saw God. Right. So, you have to understand what the Catholic school didn't care for it. I had my parents die. I was anti-God. Right. And I saw God on the steps. And I said, this is not for me. And I didn't identify as an addict. They said, who's new? I didn't say anything. When they called on me, I said, I'm John. Didn't say I'm John, an addict or anything like that. Because I wasn't accepting, right? I didn't surrender. It was brand spanking new. And then flash forward where I came to a point where I was in my basement on the stairs with my head in my hands, contemplating suicide, or thinking I was going to continually live this life of misery, right? Because it became isolating doing the drugs and drinking, right? And my mind, I had a couple of psychosis episodes on meth, right? Which apparently is not good for your mental health. And so with that being said, I had some severe issues. And yeah, by that time I had a therapist, right? I remember when I first got him and he said, do you want to stop all substances or do you just want to stop meth and continue drinking? I said, oh my God, I got options. I said, I just want to stop meth, right? And so I was on this harm reduction path where he would give me tactics on how not to do meth, but continue drinking. And that didn't work. I would get drunk, go to the bar. I would be at the bar and I'd be calling my dealer, right? Back then I'd be paging him for, right? It was pagers, right? For drugs. But with that being said, I called up my therapist and I said, because there were times before I said, maybe I need rehab. And he would laugh and he said, you can't really go to rehab on a good note. You have to go on a downslide. And I said, oh, okay. I was on a downslide, right? And I called him up and I said, I think I need to go to therapy, to rehab. And he said, yeah. He said, and he recommended one out in New Jersey, Pride Institute. And I was fortunate enough where I spoke to someone on the phone and they were in Minnesota. It's where the place was based out of, but they had a place out in Jersey. And the person said to me, okay, go through your house, get rid of the drugs, get rid of the alcohol, make sure you don't have any before you go to rehab. Right. And I remember I went to my local deli and because when you go to rehab, they tell you to pack and bring stuff, but you may not stay. And back then you couldn't really say I was a crystal meth addict. I had to overly accentuate that I was an alcoholic and a cokehead in order to stay. Because back then, meth wasn't considered an addictive for rehab, maybe for insurance purposes. I'm not sure. Yeah. And I was told that beforehand. And what happened was I went to my deli around the corner and instead of getting the expensive Sam Adams or Guinness, I got the Budweiser. And the kids behind the counter said, what happened? I said, what do you mean? You're not getting your Sam Adams or your Guinness? I said, yeah. And so I was on my way to rehab. So I wanted a drink so I could smell like alcohol. My last hurrah.
Budweiser. How sad.
Budweiser, right? Exactly. And it wasn't like I didn't have the money to buy it, but I just, for whatever reason, but it was also, again, that whole thing, right? Is that the kids behind the counter, right? Said, they knew my drinking habits.
Yeah.
Right? They knew. Right? Mm-hmm. Something's up. Something's wrong. What's wrong with this guy? They probably didn't even know my name, but they knew what I drank.
That's the Sam Adams guy.
Yeah, exactly. And then I remember one time I was probably, 3 to 6 months in sobriety. And I remember the bartender from one of the bars saw me on the street and he said, hey, where have you been? I said, oh, I got sober. He said, oh, no wonder Corona's sales went down. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. He said, I think they're going out of business. But yeah, so I went into rehab and it was a glorious 11 days, which today I'm grateful for. But when I was in there, I went in there thinking I was an addict. I didn't think I was an alcoholic. And it wasn't until I was in rehab in lockdown, I was in suicide watch. When I checked in, they said, take your belts, right? Because they don't want you to hang yourself and all this other stuff. And I looked down and they took everything and I looked down at my shoes and I said, you're not going to take my shoelaces? And they nodded their heads and they looked at me and they said, give me the shoelaces.
Oh, shoot. Pay down as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. They almost forgot about my shoelaces. And then they put me in a room where they checked on me every 20 minutes throughout the night and there's no glass, no nothing. So I was on suicide watch. So it was very humbling. And what happened was there were meetings, AA meetings that were brought into the facility, H&I, hospitals and institution. And every day for 11 days from 4 to 5 o'clock at night, I was jonesing for a drink. Jonesing.
Because that was the time of happy hour.
Right. And then I remember going through sessions and thinking to myself, and the intake as well, what's the longest time you haven't had a drink? And I couldn't remember. Right? I couldn't remember the longest time I haven't had a drink, especially in the past 3 years. And then it dawned on me. I'm a fucking alcoholic, right? And when I was in rehab, the drug abuse counselors said, okay, when you get out, you're going to have to get a sponsor and you're going to have to get anyone and everyone, but you don't get someone who's handsome because you're going to play them the way you are. And I went, what? And she said, just get anybody. So when I went to my first meeting, which honestly was a Crystal Meth Anonymous meeting, CMA, in New York City, I picked the first person who came up to me with a cane as he walked up to me with a cane. And he was my sponsor, right? And sadly enough, he died 9 months later. Now, I had 9 months of sobriety. And the reason I bring this up is because if you remember my little past, I had death. Right?
Yeah.
Now, even though I had 9 months of sobriety, I still didn't have the coping mechanism to deal with death. I remember I would go to meetings and I didn't speak. I didn't say anything. People were always surprised. And I eventually relapsed. And so what I realized then was just because you take away the drink and the drug and you have 9 months of sobriety doesn't mean you could deal effectively with death. And so what happened was when I was maybe on my third step at that point in time, even at 9 months, 12-step recovery, third step, and it was still fresh. And so I relapsed. And I had relapsed for at least another, year and a half or so. And the reason I relapsed was any and all the reasons, right? Any and all the free suggestions that were freely given to me, I didn't take, right? 90 meetings in 90 days are suggested, no relationships in the first year. I broke any and all those rules, right? I would test my sobriety. Oh, the guy's doing drugs. I should be fine going to his place and not doing drugs, right? I have the willpower, which I didn't, right? Because I have a compulsion to drink and drug, right? I'm wired differently. And any and all these things were brought to my attention as I go to more and more meetings, speak to more people, as I do step work with a sponsor. And I did this program 91 days without a sponsor, and I relapsed. And I had a sponsor, and I was relapsing. And he said to me, you keep on coming in and you keep on going out. He said, where are you going to go? I said, what do you mean? I said, there's nowhere else for me to go. I was going to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, we keep on going in and out. He said, why don't you just stay? And it was like an epiphany.
Amen.
And I was like, oh my God. And that's when I had my sobriety date as I went along. And today in my life, I have a freedom from self, bondage of self. I have a clear mind. I have a piece of serenity, right? I learned to pause, right? And it's one of those things where sponsor I had back in New York for a while, he will say I'm a totally different person, right? I don't see it, but I sometimes reflect back on how I live my life today, right? Mm-hmm. Back then I had a committee of 12 people in my head. Yes. Now I only have a committee of 2.
I was going to say I still have 4,
right?
But it might have been 50 back then. I have a question, John.
Yeah.
Because I think you just gave me an epiphany, and I'm not joking. And like I said, when you speak, it's a 4-star meeting to me. And I think it's because we have a lot of similarities. There's a lot of people's stories I don't relate to. I'm just being honest. I get something out of everyone. But when you said you got the guy on the cane, right? So I went to a men's gay meeting and I stayed. My sponsor was 76 years old when I got sober. And he was 99 when he passed with 24 years. He just had 1 more year sobriety than me, but he went to meetings every day. So I was really comfortable with him and I grew to trust him. And I will tell you, my daughter's father died, my grandfather and my mom all within, I don't know. And I was maybe 2 years sober. And I just kept going to meeting and staying busy and whatnot. When my sponsor died, oh my God, I cried for 3 months. And luckily or unfortunately, you can look at it both ways, but my sprint job of 19 years had just ended too. And it was the first time I ever really felt death, for the first time ever, despite having so much of it. And it was like, when you say that, the 9 months and he died, feeling things sober is so different than I would just stay high or busy.
Yeah. And talking about death, it's really, over the past, he's probably, I guess, 10 years of both my brothers eventually, they passed. Right. Nobody in my family lasts long, by the way. I think I have a couple more years to go. My
That's
mom,
not funny.
I think my mom died at 64, 65. Both my brothers, 64, 66. And
my mom's 68.
Really?
My dad, 42.
Oh my, yeah. Yeah.
You take the average and I almost beat it. Yeah.
We like to leave the party. And so when they both passed, I had the program to rely on. and I didn't pick up a drink or a drug. And today I could deal with death effectively, right? Which is funny to say, right? Effectively. And I'm so professional and clinical, right? I deal with death effectively.
I think effectively is you don't have to use.
Right.
That's it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, but here's the other thing. So when I was in college or thereafter, when shit would hit the fan, I drank and drugged. When I was happy, I drank and drugged. For 22 years, I didn't have emotion, right? I didn't have feelings. I didn't go through anything. There was a block, right? And I added anesthesia to myself, right? And it also prevented me from being present. I was never present, right? Today, I'm present. I don't have to, regret the past or fear the future. When both my brothers passed, I'm able to deal with grief, right? Effectively, and understand what stage I'm in. And all the stages of grief, right? Where before I was just totally aloof because I was totally drunk all the time, right?
Yeah, all of it.
Absolutely. I was aloof most of my life. I'm still aloof today. And the other thing about where I am today in my life, right? I could still, things aren't perfect, right? I still live life on life's terms. But the difference is I have a different outlook on life, right? I have hope. Today, again, I'm not religious, but I choose to say my higher power is God, right? Mm-hmm. And it's more spiritual for me. And that's what, for me, is my higher power and what gets me through things. And I have a fellowship of people, support system that when I'm going through something, I could talk to and get help. The other thing is I can go for outside issue help as well. I'd get a therapist.
And I'm not wicked religious, though I'm Catholic, but I'm very spiritual as well.
Right.
Big time.
And these are great points we've brought up with, I think, everybody we've talked to so far, where the religion and just that God.
It scares people.
And I could say it's old school, but it was a turnoff for me because of my view.
It is old school.
Was that the God that I was brought up with damned people like me. We weren't worth. And so to get around that, and it was actually in outpatient the counselor, he said, it's a doorknob. Mm. God is a doorknob that you're going to turn and open the door to your future, your sobriety. And that was what first started me clicking. Oh, it doesn't have to be this. It's not tied to this, what I was brought up with, this religious, deity. And so today I'm spiritual too. For me, it's nature. It's all around me. That's why I love gardening and get my hands in the soil, because that's my spirituality. And that's what I believe is connecting me to everything and everything to me.
The group of drunks, God worked for me for so long in good, orderly direction.
Oh, group of drunks. Yeah.
Yeah, God. Yes. That for me was it. Like I trusted the guys, Scottsy, the most harmless guy I know, but I learned to trust them. And so I could turn it over to God, the group of drunks at first. And it sounds stupid again, but the good orderly direction, because I like to be organized. I like my house clean. I like, that always worked for me too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned, you're going through life and hiding your emotions, not hiding, but, suppressing them through the drug and alcohol, which are great suppressants. And I believe for me, it was, I acted my way through so much of my life because I felt like shit. Waking up in the way I could feel horrible. And I would put on that face. I would do my hair and make sure I was shaved and dressed perfectly and tan myself because I was hiding that part of me from everybody. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I wanted to jump back to something that stuck out for me. And that was, it sounds like almost the turning point for you, even though you did go out and experiment a few more times, but sitting there contemplating suicide. And if you can, I'd like if you could expand on that a little bit, just because I think someone listening who might be in that same, if they hear something that resonates with them, maybe it'll help them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with alcohol and drug addiction, what happens is your life gets very small and very narrow. And with that happening is that your choices and options, right? Your mind gets clouded by a lot of things, right? And how could it not, right? You're inputting all these drugs, may it be alcohol, may it be meth. You may be dehydrated. You haven't eaten. So any and all of this is really going to mess with your head. And
Right.
so your ability to think of choices and options are so small. And so at that point, as an alcoholic or an addict, I want to run away from things. I want to stop it. And I have no idea how. Right? And so the only two options I thought I had at that moment was to get rid of myself and stop the crazy,
Right.
or to continue on this linear path of getting worse and worse. Right. And that's all I thought of. There was no other, right? I was in this little bubble of fear. And for whatever reason, luckily and blessing enough, I had a therapist, right? That as I laid there recovering from my drug addiction wound of trying to rehydrate and everything else, I decided to call my therapist and about something messed up in the world or in your head. So this therapist got me to where I was and sent me off to rehab. And he was my therapist probably for about 11 years. And by the way, for all of you, therapy works a lot better when you're sober and not drunk or high. So just to let you know, it's a waste of money, but it's still good to get a foundation down so you can go back and get help. But that therapist was fantastic. He did work in his condo in Chelsea. He was specifically a drug addiction specialist, worked at the Gay Men's Health Crisis as their director at one point. And then left for private practice, and he was referred to me, and he was fantastic. And I eventually moved out of state from New York and moved down to the South. And while I was there, 3 months while I was there, and at that time, my therapist wasn't my therapist, I later found out he died by suicide.
Oh, wow. You were in the program, so you were able to...
I was in the program. I had about 7, 8 years at that point, and it's a mind fuck.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. This man who was able to save so many people, and his obituary was in the New York Times, right? He was that powerful. And I remember, and I have to talk about this, but during 9/11, right? He volunteered his time to actually help people who were trying to recover from that, literally that week when it happened.
Wow.
And so I remember appointments were canceled, or if not, rescheduled, right? So this man who was able to help so many people died by suicide. And oddly enough, on Facebook, his therapist, because therapists have therapists, was available to chat. And so I reached out and I said, what happened? And he was going through some life issues, breakup, and he was writing a book, and he thought he missed the mark on something on the book and couldn't go back because it was already printed and whatever reason.
Yeah.
But it just shows you how fragile life can be. And again, I dealt with the death of him. I managed to get through it. And I called his therapist to talk it through, which was really great because he said, if you ever need to talk, call me again. And he didn't charge me. It's even better, right? Funny quick story. And the reason I say this is I was at the bathhouse back in New York, and I was living down in the South, and I came back up to visit, and there was my therapist. And he was in a relationship, so I was surprised he was there. And here we were both in towels. And we were chit-chatting, and we finished talking. He was very cordial and friendly, and we had a good time. And at the end of it, before we walked away from each other, I said, you're not going to charge me for this, are you? And he started laughing, right? 6 months later, he passed or died by suicide.
Yeah.
But it was, again, a blessing that I saw him there. I'd never seen him there before.
Yeah.
But it was me seeing him. And it's odd because he was in a long-term relationship. Never saw him there before. And he didn't even mention there was a breakup. But this, again, that whole thing of talking about what you're going through, right? Not stuffing some of these things, like you said. And I don't know what was happening with him or anything else was involved. But again, we carry on, right? We do recover. And it's through this sobriety journey that I've had multiple surgeries. One of the things I remember, I was going into surgery, that was going to be a couple of hours for something. And I remember I was going to go under the knife, and it's going to be robotic. And I remember saying to myself, should I be afraid I'm going to die? I may not come out of this.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me, I'm going to be sleeping. It's not up to me. It's up to my higher power. Whatever happens.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about this. This is not within my power, not within my domain. And I've had two surgeries where I went into thinking about it that way. And it's so much better than friggin' stressing about if I'm going to live or die. And it's funny because every year it's my birthday. I'm grateful to be alive because in times past, in the circumstances and situations I put myself in, may it be naked up in Harlem, up on a roof, being tweaked out, hanging out with a fellow addict, thinking I was going to be thrown off and still being okay with it because I was that adrenaline junkie. I'm alive.
I was going to bring that up. It's like how many times during our time of use did we totally not care? We never gave it a second thought. Driving in the car, drunk, everybody's just watching the road line go back and forth in front of the headlights. I could be dead in minutes.
For years, actually, in Boston, I was a DDD, a designated drunk driver. I remember one time we were friends in Boston and they had a stick shift and everybody said, I can't drive a stick shift. I said, I can drive a stick shift, right? It's really odd, right? And so thank God, again, I'm knocking wood, and that's my mother. I'm knocking wood, but it's one of those things where there were at least 2 times during a semi-formal in college, I got deathly ill and people would say I turned green. That wasn't until I got sober and realized that was probably alcohol poisoning.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I could have died. I was the type of guy who vomited in a bar, in the bathroom, and came back out and did shots. Right?
That's
nothing's wrong with that. Right?
I got physically sick.
Yeah.
Almost every time I did meth, and I would get higher after, but I knew it was good dope if I got sick. For real. Same with the ecstasy. And I've had a lot of stomach problems, but every single time almost, I literally had to get sick. And if I didn't get sick, then it really wasn't good dope. And I'm going to tell you, if you haven't been sick at cotton fever, when you leave just a little piece of cotton that you draw up the syringe with and you get it in, is probably the worst sickness ever. Anytime I've ever had, ever. It's like having your gallbladder attack plus giving birth plus having a cesarean. And I literally kept this cab driver with me everywhere I went in the escort service. I paid him by the hour, so he made more money. Plus I would have the client pay his fare, so he would get paid for me, the client. I was a dream come true. He literally stayed with me for 2 days because I got sick. And he was like, he was ready to take me to the hospital. It's amazing what we go through. Like you said, the green.
I used to take out Tums and stuff because I would get that upset stomach from drinking, so I could drink more.
Why not? That makes sense to me, right? Yeah, it makes sense.
I literally had 14 surgeries on my stomach the first 2 years in AA. And it was getting the IV. They missed 6 times. And I literally had the meltdown at the hospital, and my sponsor came, and then they wrapped my arms in towels, and it was amazing. It was horrible. And at that time, getting the needle in my arm for anything was very uncomfortable for me. The only way I can explain it was if you were drinking alcohol, but you don't get drunk. I was getting a needle in my arm and not getting high, and it was a mind fuck. I now get blood taken out of my hand and I turn my head. But just recently when I had the hand surgery, I had to have anesthesia, and because I guess I have bad arteries, really small, perfect person to do all that. But I just make them. And it's really weird how you get in those things where being around alcohol is not something I choose. Because drunk people annoy the fuck out of me. Like when you said you're going to events and you have your grape juice, I always planned, do they have good food there? Because I'm not going to drink. I don't think I'd ever went to an event that they were just drinking. There had to be food there too because it was safe and whatnot. But yeah, that's green, John, green.
You reminded me of something. And the last year before sobriety, I remember, and it's the worst feeling to drink and not get drunk. I remember drinking a 12-pack and feeling like, and I'm like, what happened? Did they give me water? What? Like, I didn't even think, like, how is that possible? And I would drink more.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't drink it. I remember that.
Yeah.
At that point, it was vodka. I was drinking vodka out of the bottle, and there wasn't enough. I could not get to that point anymore. That peaceful place that I
The
that
oblivion.
oblivion. Yeah, I couldn't get there.
It's frustrating.
It was horrible. Yeah, it was so frustrating. And then that's what I was like, oh, what else is there out there? That I was thinking that way, and luckily I never did. But
And I'm a hypochondriac, so I'm thinking my liver's not working, or maybe working too well. I'm like, what's going on? Is this going to be forever? I'm not happy with this, right? I'm going to have to switch drinks.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I did, right? When I thought I was drinking too much beer, I switched to Bushmill Black and drank that straight. And then I realized it bothered my acid reflux, so I had to go back to beer. But I thought switching seats on a Titanic would actually help. But no, I was going in the same direction. I was going
how
down.
you think, you'd think if you ate some kind of food and it made you sick, you'd be like, I'm never eating that again. Like where we ate yesterday. But when it's an addiction,
We are not going there ever again, just so you know. If we both had to share a bottle of Tums at different houses, I'm just saying. The fellowship was good.
right.
I will put that up there.
But just think how our minds are when it comes to drinking and drugging. You don't feel good. You just figure out a way to make you feel better so you can still continue. It's like your mind is.
Well, and that is funny you say about the different beers. I think a lot of the reasons I didn't drink is because I didn't want to be like my mom. And so instead, I went down a different path. But I remember literally buying meth, and the brown dope would make my face break out, which wasn't good for my look good.
Of course.
So I literally had to find the white, what do you call it? Ephedrine.
Oh, but
So I would have to get the clear ephedrine dope versus the propanol dope, it's alcohol, because one didn't break out my face and one did.
you're a bougie meth user.
It was. And guess what?
Bougie
Because I didn't want to go around tweakers because I was better than that.
Of course.
I wasn't a tweaker. I was a businesswoman. And so I would just buy an ounce of the good stuff at a time. And yeah, that was my whole plan.
Once again, I wanted to mention that you said that, and the reason I say this is because, and anyone who's listening to this, you don't have to get as bad as any of us or one of us or any of us. And the reason I say that is because I have yets, right? Yes, I didn't get a DUI. I wasn't incarcerated, even though I could have been. I never shut up. And the reason I say that is because some people may say, I haven't shut up, so I'm not an addict. For me, I know where I'm at. And I know, even though I haven't shut up, it's a yet. God forbid if I was to go out again, that could be a yet. And here's a weird story again with my higher power that I think was in play. I remember one time I met some guy on one of the gate apps, and he said, here's the address. Why don't you come in? And I was probably on a 3-day bender already. So I get in a cab, very responsible with myself, get in a cab. And so I get in the cab and I go to this address, which I didn't pay attention to. And I get to the front. And of course, it's my therapist's building.
Wow.
And the door guy looks at me and looks at his watch, and it's the weekend. And normally I come during the weekday, and he goes, you're not here to see Bob, are you? I said, no. And so I gave him the person's name, and the floor was right above my therapist's floor. And I remember being in bed, and the guy says, do you shoot up? I said, no. I said, you want to shoot me up? He goes, yeah. I literally laid in bed. As he came over to me, he paused and said, no. Amazing. Wow. I don't know what happened. I don't know if Bob was hitting the, with a broomstick, right? Back in the day. I don't know. And so it was just like, he literally just went, nope. And so it was amazing. So it was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
And I left there eventually. I couldn't even tell you what happened, but it was quite scary. And I have to say, when I was in New York City, I remember one time I was totally drunk, and I took a cab home, and I think the cab driver may have been drunk. So there's nothing worse than being in the back of a cab in a cage where the taxi driver ahead of you is actually swerving the car, and you're actually yelling at the cab driver to wake him up.
God.
Thinking you're doing something well, not driving drunk. I'm like, what is this?
Oh my God.
This is ruining my high. But, classic New York City story. But yeah.
Can I tell you Radio Cab and Broadway Cab?
Oh, yeah.
I have an undying devotion for both of them. I believe that literally they probably saved my life a few times. Like I told you, there was 2, and one of the guys is dead now. So I can say his name without breaking his anonymity. But Bill Dunn literally just went with me everywhere, and I would pager. we had codes, and they would walk me to the door, and I would drop my money with them so you couldn't take my money back. And I would check ID. I had like all these things that I did for the escort service. And again, I was bougie. It might have been $100 service fee at the beginning, but it was thousands and thousands at the end. And you know why I shot up? Because I didn't want to look like I had a bloody nose. It was my look good as well. And this lady who shot me up, I didn't ask. And I've never shot anyone up. I had some principles and whatnot. But same thing, once you get high that way. And that's just like the Yets. If I went back to meth now, does it have fentanyl? Am I Chase that had 3 years of recovery and literally just got high once and died? Or my daughter's father, who went through treatment and was doing good, got high one time and died. Literally, like, you don't know. And what you think just might be a relapse literally might be a death.
Right.
We always say you end up 3 ways: recovery, jail, or death. I literally believe that. And I have 2 of them. And at this point in time, if I died it's bad enough to die, but if I died not sober, I think that would be the worst after everything I've gone through.
Right.
And for my child.
And there was one time I had a drug dealer who was a good friend. And I don't know, I gave him $200 for drugs, or I don't even know how much it was. And he said, he was up in the project. So he said, I'll be right back. And he went up in the building and never came out. And I was like, this guy just robbed me. And he's a good friend. And so what I did for the next probably year, we had a pager. It was back then. As I worked throughout Manhattan, I would stop at police precincts and go to the payphones in East Police Precinct, get the payphone that was in the common lobby, and actually take the number and page it to the phone, to the pager for my drug dealer, so that when he called back the number, the police station would pick up the phone. Oh, and I knew he would be paranoid that the police was calling him. All the precincts around Manhattan, I just did it for a full year. Just kept on going. I stop in the police station, look at the number, put it in the phone, and just leave. And
that's when payphones could take incoming calls.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I thought I was savvy. I was like, I'll get this guy back.
So on 15th and Morrison, there's the Morrison Apartments. There was one payphone on the corner that took incoming calls. That's insane. And just for the escort service, I had a 1-800 number pager.
Back then, look at that.
Yeah.
Sophisticated.
And the last 4 digits were 3,000. Because if you were going to be at the Sheridan, I wanted you to remember, I like literally the Benson and the Sheridan were my favorite. And Lloyd Center Red Lion, because Lloyd Center Red Lion, you could go to the 3rd floor of the parking garage and there was an elevator. So you didn't have to go through the lobby. You could slide in and have the cab waiting, slide out. And the Benson, if I went there, I looked like I was a law student at Lewis and Clark, because the Benson is very beyond bougie. You know, but it's crazy. Mm-hmm. It's amazing what we go through.
Oh, yeah. And how our minds work and what we think of ourselves, and then the reality of what people actually see or how we really are.
Mm-hmm.
An active addiction in drinking for me is that I also had a perception problem. May it be of others or even of myself.
Yeah.
And I remember being in the height of my drinking and looking at another person who was also drinking and saying, wow, they are so horrible, and gossiping with coworkers about, they can't keep it together. They're always drunk. And hello, Kettlebat.
And I thought I looked the best because I had lost weight. I thought, and people kept telling me, oh, girl, you look good. And I'd have a long sleeve shirt on. So you'd never see anything. And when I went to see my mom, same thing. I would be tan. My nails would be flawless. So she wouldn't have a clue. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, one of my bottoms in using crystal meth as I got older is that I wasn't losing weight when I used. So I stopped. That was depressing for me. I didn't lose weight on meth anymore. So that's when things are bad, right?
See, I always did. And that was because I wouldn't eat. I would all I could eat was a glass of milk and a plain cake donut.
Yeah, and
or
your
cereal.
Rice Krispies.
Yeah, Rice Krispies.
Yeah, it is quite amazing. There's something else I want to say, and I totally drew a blank. But yeah.
As we get towards the end here, we're getting to a point to wrap it up. But I did want to touch on, we've talked about the journey, but about the promises. How's life now? What's today like for you?
So, Peter, I want to say, I hate you right now. No, I'm kidding. Again, the blessing of the program of the promises is that what's really amazing is that right now I'm currently unemployed and had some work struggles over the past 9 years I've been out here in Portland, Oregon, and have definitely put a financial strain, right? And I've had some other issues as well. And what's really amazing is that the way the program is set up, the way meetings are, the way friends, sponsors, and people in the program, it's the only time I know with recovery, you can have shit hit the fan.
Amen.
And when you see someone, they ask you how you are, and you're good, right? And even though I could have all this shit going on, I still have the levity to say, I'm good, right? I still keep in touch with my high school teacher, who's now probably, 84.
What?
He had some medical issues over the past year, so he doesn't call me, so I have to call him, which I had a little mini resentment too, but I call him out of respect. And I called him up on my way here today. And he sounds great. He wasn't sounding great a couple of months ago. And he said, how are you? I said, I'm good. I said, I have a lot of shit going on, but I'm good. And I said, it's the program in action. Just to give you, for example, for today, what I did a Zoom meeting at 9:15 in my old home group in New York City, right? That was my 9:15. I did that for an hour. The next following hour, I worked with a sponsee on step work. Right?
John's quite popular in the sponsee thing. And people get resentments over not getting John.
As long as they don't go out, but yes, and then I came here. It's a busy action day, and help was really strange. When I was, again, in drinking and drugging, I was very self-oriented, very selfish, very self-oriented. It was all about me and getting my drugs. And being in recovery, the way the steps are laid out, the 12 steps, it's really set up to trust in a higher power, clean house, service to others, right? As long as I'm doing those three things, I'm good for today, right? And by helping another alcoholic or helping another addict, right? Doing a 12-step call, which basically means helping someone get into recovery and reaching out to people at a time, right? But doing any and all of that really takes me out of myself, right? Because a lot of times I'm inward.
Yeah.
And if I'm too inward and too focused on me, it could sometimes get a little depressing, right? And so I have to look outward. And a lot of times when I reach out to other people and help them, I'm helping me. So it's this weird symbiotic thing, right? I don't want to say it's very parasitic, but it's very symbiotic in helping other people. And the other thing about recovery that I find with 12-step is very paradoxical. And what I mean by that is I didn't believe in a higher power. Now I have one, right? I came into the rooms. I hated the slogans. Now I love the slogan, right?
Same.
It's this little dichotomy, right? Of things going back and forth of what it is. It vacillates, right? And I could tell you as an alcoholic, I just got the chills. I have contempt prior to investigation, right? Think about my first 12-step meeting. I swear to God, nope, don't want this. I'm quick on that. Nope, don't want this. I'm my mother. Fuck them. I don't want this. That's how I am. And then all of a sudden, right, as I surrender and as I hit bottom and I become more open and willing, as they say, right? Honesty, open-mindedness, and willing, I'm able to move forward, which I never did before. I never moved forward. I stood still, right?
Right.
Now I'm able to move forward and grow. I remember one time I went to a meeting in New York City and this woman who was Buddhist spoke and she said, if you don't want to have the pain of spiritual growth, this program is not for you. Oh my God. Then I went to another meeting and somebody said, this is AA, right? Or Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, is like having surgery, but you've taken away the anesthesia, which is alcohol. It can be painful, but get through it.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those miraculous things that if you stick around long enough, keep coming back and stay and do the work and have a connection to others and your higher power, you'll stay sober.
And life, on that note, right? You said the job, you know what I'm saying, isn't perfect right now. But you're part of the no matter what club. No matter what. And I too have had some of the most difficult things in AA, way more difficult than before. Believe it or not, prison was easy compared to some things. But literally, I know no matter what, I go to a meeting. And I think the people that I hear it in meetings all the time about the God thing and whatnot, I was that person. Just keep coming back and stick around. Don't leave before the miracle happens. Because I know I'm a miracle. And that's crazy, but I truly know that I am because I see it in the street and whatnot.
Yeah.
That could be me. We all have just one day.
Yeah. Looking back at what I went through and put myself through and others, and the fact that I'm here today, it's a miracle. It's a miracle.
We're all miracles.
And you mentioned promises, right? I no longer regret the past. Even though I may have financial worry, it's not, debilitating me. And I have hope, right? I didn't have hope before. I was I was in the basement contemplating suicide, right? Hope wasn't in that little wheelhouse that I had. And today I have options, right? I could reach out for help. Going back to when I was a kid, I was pretty much made to be self-sufficient as a child, right? 7 years old, making breakfast, 15 years old, hanging out, getting my ear done without parental suggestion, having a needle poked in my ear in a kitchen and having an earring and my father saying, my Italian father saying, "What are you, a fucking faggot?" And I didn't say anything. That's how he reacted. I was self-sufficient and it was great for most of my life, right? I lost my parents at an early age. I was self-sufficient. But when you come to AA, that doesn't work. Right. My self-sufficiency, good, better, and different, granted, got me to where I am today. But once you're in the program, it's a we program, right?
Yes.
It's not just solo. And there's a saying in my old home group on the wall, which I don't know if I really agree with, but it says there's no wrong way to get sober.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? It means that the way I got sober doesn't mean the way you have to get sober.
Yeah.
Or each of us, right? So if you're going to go to a different 12-step meeting or not a 12-step meeting, and you have a therapist or not have a therapist or have a clergyman or a rabbi or an imam, wherever it may be, and it gets you through and staying recovered, that's what helps, right? A rehab, whatever it may be. There's no wrong way to get recovered.
I love how you put that because that's something that I wanted to express with this program, to let people see that there are different ways and it doesn't have to be so rigid or everybody has to wear a size 7 shoe because we're all not size 7 shoes or feet. So I love that. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, it's weird because one, being a sponsor, as I have been, it's one of these things you have to be open, right? I can't be closed. I have to be an open thinker, right? So if somebody comes to me, I remember back in New York, I had an ex-con who was a murderer, right? He was a murderer. And he asked me to be a sponsor, right? And I said, yes. How could I not?
That's really being open-minded.
Right? It's one of these things where there's such an array of people in these programs, right? Who am I to judge, right? And this person's reaching their hand out to get sober. And it's just a beautiful thing, right? If it says it in the book. There's some of us are so different, and how is it that we're able to be together? But we are, because we have the common thing of being an alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever may be the case. But I've had sponsees that may believe in paganism, right? Whatever it is, right? And so I have to be open to that. And when I was back in New York, my sponsor was Buddhist, and I believed in God. And he would tell me to get on my knees and pray. However hard that was for him to say, but that's because that's my higher power and his was Buddhism in nature. It's actually honesty and truth was his directional focus for his higher power, right? And so there's so many various different ways. It's not as rigid as you said, right? And so it's very open. And that's why when I go to meetings and I hear people either talk down one or the other, right? When they talk down Christian or Judaism or whatever it is, Islam, whatever, I've even had Muslim sponsees and anyone who's celebrating Ramadan Mubarak, because it is Ramadan. It's one of those beautiful things. You can embrace others for their belief and support them. And in doing so, I also learn things. I learn things about others that I may have never learned before because I may have been closed-minded or so narrow. So it's been really beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing, for being willing to be here with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I've heard many of the podcasts online. I was very eager to do this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I want to thank you for coming here. You are a part of my heart and you help me all the time. Literally, I tell you this, I didn't realize even how many more similarities there was until today. That is just, it's insane. And I really thank you for sharing, because I think I know the people, David from GTD or Daniel, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think if they just might have heard this, maybe they would have made a different choice. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want. Or somebody to stick around.
Yeah.
I don't want any more chases. And I know there's going to be, I'm not unrealistic. But if we touch one person, we've done it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thanks again, Peter, with Real Recovery Podcast.
This is Julie and John.
And
John C. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks to each and every one of you for lending us your ears and hearts. Your engagement is what fuels our passion and keeps this podcast thriving.
We cherish the moments we share here and hope they resonate with you. Whether you're on a daily commute, at the gym, or just taking a moment for yourself.
Make sure to head over to our website at realrecoverypodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to our newsletter for the latest insights and uplifting stories from our community delivered straight to your inbox.
Click that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player too, so you can keep up with every new episode. It's your support that keeps our conversation alive and meaningful.
And if our stories have touched you, consider using the donate button on our site. Your contributions, no matter the size, are deeply appreciated. They help us continue our mission of sharing hope and healing.
Join us beyond the podcast and follow our journey on social media. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. All the links are on our site, so you can stay connected and be a part of the Real Recovery community every day.
Your likes, shares, and comments not only spread the message of recovery, but also remind us that we're all in this together.
So, until we meet again, remember that recovery is a journey, not a destination, and we'll be here to accompany you every step of the way to recovery, real recovery.
Thanks for listening.